One of the main arguments I hear back when abolition comes up is people say, well, what about the dangerous people?
Right.
And I wonder how you think about that question of the dangerous people.
Right. You know, I think about that a lot. I've been thinking about that question a lot. And I think I'm always, depending on the day, having a different idea. And the one thing that I go back to is Ruthie Gilmer, who's a professor at CUNY and one of the founders of Critical Resistance, talks about, really importantly, I think, no one is innocent, right? There's not, a violent person and a non-violent person. We're always doing, all of us together are doing things that are hurting other people. Part of being in a relationship with people means that one person at some point is going to, enact harm on another person, and that's it's really important to know that there's not a dichotomy of innocent people and guilty people. The logic, I think, of the state, of the prison system, demands that idea that there is innocent people and guilty people, so that all sorts of structures and all sorts of processes like policing, prisons, imprisonment, deportation, can be justified because some people are dangerous, or some people are guilty, or some people are the violent ones. And I think there's a really long history going back to slavery where where the state is really dependent on this logic that freed black people are incredibly dangerous, and there goes the invention of the black codes, or poor people wandering are incredibly dangerous, and there goes the logic of policing on low income and poor people. So I would say that no one is innocent. People are consistently harming each other all the time. There are some people who are held accountable by the state for doing that kind of harm, and there are some people who will never be held accountable by the state for doing that kind of harm. So people who are running Blackwater, or people who are running the military, or Obama, or all these people who are consistently, the chief of police in the NYPD, or, all these people. There was Lieutenant Begonia, or the person's name who sprayed this one person at Occupy Wall Street, NYPD officer, and just was acquitted, and now the city is going to defend that person in a civil suit. And I just think this is kind of interesting moment where we're seeing that really clearly, and some people have been forced to see this their entire lives. It was never a mystery for a lot of us, but I think more and more people are seeing that some people are deemed dangerous and some people are deemed innocent, and because of the work of social movements, because of really incredible cultural work, that kind of division, I think, is starting to really crumble in ways that are pretty inspiring.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
It does, yeah. It's interesting to me, too. I think one of the main things that social movements do is change what violence is,
Right.
what is considered violent.
Right.
So when a social movement says, feminists said, actually these things that happen inside your home are not like your private business, they're
Right.
actually violence. Or when people who are organizing labor say it's actually violence, people work in sweatshops, and we're all involved in consumer economies that support that violence. It's that idea that sort of everyone is part of economies of violence, everyone is engaged in violence, whether it's the sensationalized violence, or whether it's the run-of-the-mill violence that actually runs the world and makes people's lives end early all the time. To me, politicizing the question of what counts as violence helps us move away from ideas about who is dangerous that are rooted in slavery and are rooted in capitalism, and make our prisons be full of poor people and people of color, and especially black people. I think that is a useful reframe.
Yeah.
Another one that I hear a lot, definitely, I hear this from my students when we read abolition work, is people really believe in the concept of the sociopath. They believe that there's certain kinds of people who are, can't be reformed or redeemed, who are just totally dangerous, and then we must have prisons to lock them up. How do you respond to that one?
So I think this narrative of people with psychiatric illness and psychiatric disabilities being more dangerous than anyone else is extremely dangerous, extremely scary, and has been used to justify violence against people with disabilities for a very long time, and has also been used in a particularly racialized way where there's a long history of black people being overdiagnosed with schizophrenia, right? As if schizophrenia is something that makes people more dangerous to begin with, but this way that people are being managed through the medical industrial complex and its complicity with the prison industrial complex. So I think first it's pause. Let's think about how when we articulate narratives and pushbacks against the idea that no one should be in prison, and a student might say, well, actually, what about the sociopath? What about the schizophrenic person? What about the psychotic person? I think we really have to make sure that we're saying, no one should be in prison, right? And then challenge people on their ideas of what schizophrenia and psychosis and being a sociopath actually means for someone's life. And also then challenge who's invested in the idea that people with psychiatric disabilities are more violent than people running the government, people operating drones, people who are targeting places to be droned. I think that's really important.
And the other thing that point brings up for me is the argument I've often heard abolitionists make, that the motivation around the prison, the justification, what about the serial killers, what about the sociopaths, really ignores the fact that the prison is the serial killer.
Exactly.
The prison is the serial rapist. Like, if we really wanted to reduce rape and reduce early death, we would get rid of the prison. That would be like the biggest chunk we could bite out of those significant problems in our culture. And that kind of fear of that individual that we all see represented on Law and Order every single day, and in so many movies, that individual who supposedly is this psychiatrically diagnosed serial killer, serial rapist, that notion is so ableist and so needs a critique of medicalization that understands the things you were talking about, like the ways that psychiatric diagnosis is made more on people of color and women and trans and queer people and poor people, the ways that medical categories of psychiatric disorder are historically contingent, are about social order and social control. They're not actually about something like hard and fast, and that the invention of things like the sociopath, they haven't existed in all cultures. So what does this thing mean, right? And what is it, why do we believe this thing, if it does exist, exists in our culture? And what are the root causes of it, instead of just assuming there are these bad people and we must control them, so therefore we must have a prison, even though, of course, what number of people in U.S. prisons actually have any kind of charges against them related to those behaviors that people are imagining? Almost none. So it's an interesting set of logical leaps that I think happen to make something like the figure of a sociopath on Law and Order episodes have as much power as it has to justify this gigantic, sort of historically outrageously huge system of harm.